If we have time, I'd love to share this eventually. These are some of the basic principles that we've come up with for what we call guided learning or hybrid teaching that I'd love to share with you eventually. For now, I'll share, well, we've already had our kind of welcome. We'll get around to our discussion of what blocks are and how it relates to design. I want to start just kind of at a high level view by talking about what Pathwright looks like when you're starting to design a course. I won't spend a ton of time on this. We've got a lot of resources in our help articles and in courses on our own school called Pathwright Grow that show you how to use a lot of what you see here. This is what we call our dashboard. It's kind of your 10,000 foot view of what's going on in your school. I've got stuff I'm teaching. I've got courses that are both available to the public and courses that are private. By the way, sometimes I'll call a course a path or a path a course. Those are interchangeable in my world. And then we've got our community area. That gives us a view of everybody that's hanging out in our school. And then down here, we can see all the activity that's going on, what people have registered for, what they've completed, all good stuff like that. All of this is exportable as well. So this is kind of the 10,000 foot view. I want to zoom down probably 8,000 feet now and look at what it's like to start designing a course. If you do this yourself, you can do this by going over to menu, and then you'll either see designing or teaching here. And you can click on either one of those. Then you go to this design tab, and pretty much from here on out, what you build, what you create in Pathwright is exactly what your learner is going to see. And we design it like that on purpose because we want it to be intuitive to put yourself in the learner's shoes as you're creating what they need. So we're gonna create a course. I just did this yesterday, so you see our new course down there. So we've got our new course. We click into this. And now we're in design mode. So I want to point out a couple of things real quick. Pathwright works on a master cohort kind of model. So whenever we're designing a course here in this master version, we're actually designing kind of like, I like to think of it as the textbook at the publishing house. You don't bring all the students to the publishing house to read the textbook. You're going to ship the textbook out. This is kind of us writing and designing the textbook at the publishing house. Later on, we're going to create what we call cohorts, and that's kind of like throwing that textbook into a classroom. That's where we're going to add teachers. That's where we're going to add learners. We can even customize the master version of the course later on for our particular cohort, tinker with maybe like the 10-20% of it that we want to customize. But right now, we're kind of designing the master, the main version of this course. So again, Pathwright works on what you build, what you click is what your learner is going to see. We can drop in our first lesson or learning session or activity or whatever we want to call these. We can start adding in these blocks. Then we create what Pathwright calls learning steps. So these are the activities that one by one our learners are going to take to move through our path. So kind of like, you take a certain path through Central Park and you might go by the ice skating rink or the zoo or whatever it might be. We're going to design what that path looks like. So some of it might be wild and foresty, but there's going to be some design to it as well. I generally think, and we'll talk about this in terms of blocks later, that every good anytime lesson on Pathwright has 3 parts. And it kind of works like, you can think of it in terms of a sitcom or like a video game. I was thinking of it, Renee, in terms of a video game. When you start the video game, it always situates you in what the story is. It gives you kind of a big picture, inspirational view of what you're going to be doing in that game. Then it sends you out to do all of your individual missions. Some games you even get to choose the order that you do them in. Some games are pretty strict on how, you need to do this thing, then this thing, then this thing, and it's going to all unfold in this story-like format. At the end of each level, you have some sense of accomplishment, some big accomplishment, generally some way to know that you've gotten better at this game, or some way to know that you need to go back and do this level, right? Generally, every good anytime lesson on Pathwright is going to have that kind of structure. I love starting with a video. In my own research with the continuing education programs that I've worked with, the first step of a course is one of the most effective places to have video. We've done this test with several of our partners, but by adding a 1 to 2 minute video at the beginning of an anytime lesson, we've increased the engagement rate in that lesson by 20 to 30%. My feeling is, and what I can see from some research that I've done, is that this ties back to this guy, Matthew Crawford, out of the University of Chicago, actually quit his professor job to go work on motorcycle repair. He's written several books called The World Beyond Your Head. He's big into how we can kind of manipulate space to help us learn new skills. I care a lot about space and place and how place can be created online. He says that in an online environment, especially, we need to engage a person's right to be addressed. We need to show our face, because so much of the internet is people talking without showing their faces. And when we show our face on the internet, it kind of becomes a radical act. If you think about like all of the advertisements that you're bombarded with on an airplane, right? Which I know a lot of us aren't doing air travel right now, right? You see all of these ads and nobody's telling you who's talking to you. So for a teacher or for even a previous learner to show up and say directly to the camera, what you're about to learn mattered to me. Here's how it changed my life, can be a radical act. It doesn't have to be long, but it increases engagement. So I love starting with a video. We could drop in maybe a reading, and then we'll round this out with a discussion and project. Now, we've designed a really simple kind of template. At Pathwright, we want this kind of like difference between designing the pacing and the outline. We want that to be different and set apart from designing the content. So we're still at this kind of outline stage. Let's say I wanted to repeat this, and I knew I wanted to repeat this for 7 lessons, 7 learning sessions. I could just copy that template real quick, and it's gonna pop back out another lesson with exactly those steps. Maybe I put different content in those, obviously, right? Then when you're ready, you can jump into the content building phase. That's where you click into a step, and then the world of blocks kind of unfolds. So we've got 30 plus different learning blocks, and we're adding 1 to 2 more about every 6 weeks. Some based on things that we want to create, some based on things that we're working with partner educators to create. And these range from really simple ways to organize text to to-do lists and flashcards to different kinds of assessments, even project uploads and things like that, or media that you can both upload, like you can upload a video or an audio file, but you can also embed virtually any kind of content. So I've embedded, obviously videos from Vimeo, YouTube, other Wistia, other hosting sites. I also regularly embed Google Forms and Typeforms directly to a path. And then probably the weirdest thing I've embedded, on the side, I run a company that does vocational counseling, vocational coaching. And in that, we have our clients schedule sessions with us. I've actually embedded a scheduler. So in the path, people schedule all of their sessions with me in a row, which can be really handy. I'll show you that later. So I now want to move into talking. Well, actually, let's take a break. Does anybody have any questions so far before I start talking about these 3 different elements of a good lesson and how we can snap blocks together to create interactive environments? Any questions so far? I've noticed the chat.
The questions look like they're drinking it up.
Nice. I did have one question. When you said it can be exported, what does it get exported as, and can you import from other platforms? So like if you have a course that was developed on a different learning management system platform, are you able to import from there, or?
Great question. So if I said that, I did not mean to. So Pathwright doesn't import or export easily, partly because we work so much differently than a lot of other LMSs. Interestingly, though, part of the team that I run specializes in just transferring courses, either from like PDFs and Google Docs to Pathwright or from other LMSs to Pathwright. In the process of one of my recent projects, our dev team has kind of pushed on a way to import SCORM files into Pathwright. So that might be a new development. Right now, it's kind of, we're working on what that looks like. We just developed a way to easily turn XML files into more easily readable text files that make some of that conversion more easily. XML files just don't end up being super handy for purposes other than importing and exporting. So we're playing around with that right now, but it's not super easy to import and export right now. Any other questions?
Julie asks, is there a database of paths? And I think we're going to get to that a little bit later. So let's get an introduction to how to build a path, and then we'll see how we might look at other examples.
Okay, so I kind of think of blocks like we're going to dump all the Lego blocks onto the table, right? And there's always a point when you're a kid playing with Legos where you decide not to use the instruction manual anymore. People can tell you what to do with them, but then you decide you want to combine the pirate Lego set and the space Lego set and create space pirates because that's much more interesting. And that's kind of where I love turning over blocks to educators, because that's where we take what should be normal and clean cut and we make it really interesting. So it's where we kind of develop our own Hogwarts, and it feels like this magical place that we are arriving at. So I want to real quick talk in 3 different parts. First, about how we can snap together blocks to create those engaging introductions, then how we can snap them together to teach the main idea and skills in creative and organized ways, and then finally, how we can create projects that are interesting and that have a kind of choose your own adventure style element if possible. And then if we've got time, we'll wrap up with questions and do's and don'ts, things like that. Okay, so first off, let's start with making introductions. You all are educators, so you know how to introduce a good lesson. Generally, how I sum it up for people is that a good introduction, especially in an anytime kind of environment, not a real-time kind of environment, needs to do at least 2 of 3 things. It needs to inform. So we need to kind of lay the foundation. Here are the basic here's the basic vocab, the basic ideas, the basic principles that you need to know to learn whatever's going to happen next. Second, if possible, it should inspire. This should be connected to real life or a person's real story. For instance, one of my favorite poets is this guy named Osip Mandelstam. He wrote in Russia. He actually wrote this satirical poem against Stalin that ended up getting him killed. If I was going to start a course on his life, I would say something like, if it weren't for Anna Akhmatova and Nadezhda Mandelstam, the work of Osip Mandelstam might have been wholly forgotten. We wouldn't have any of it. I'm putting some kind of tension around why this person's story matters. Then we dive into a story. Thirdly, it reveals ignorance. A good introduction is going to show what a person doesn't know, the most difficult thing to show. We can also call that surprise, because surprise is just ignorance that we don't mind finding out about. Nobody minds, right, a magic trick being done in front of them and they don't know how it happened, because it feels cool. Hopefully we can show that kind of thing in surprise. So real quick, combining blocks for a personal introduction, kind of standard is something like just snapping together a video and an assessment question. So let's say that I'm teaching on, like Joseph Campbell has this series, The Power of Myth, and I'm going to teach a whole course on that whole series. I kick it off with this 2-minute introduction. It's bombastic, inspiring. You've got Martin Luther King Jr. and rocket ships. So I pull my learner in, and then I just ask a simple open-ended question that gets them writing in this introduction. What strikes you most about Joseph Campbell's introduction? Something that we talk a lot about, something I picked up from another educational partner I worked with for a couple years, was the difference between lean forward and lean back activities on the internet. So much of the internet is about lean back kind of activities. If you think about, for instance, how Netflix is structured for an autoplay kind of sequence, then virtually every other video platform started to pick that up. They just want to play the next episode and keep you in that loop. It's almost the exact opposite in online learning. We want to get people to lean forward. We want to get them to interact. Even a simple click keeps them going. That's one reason why Pathwright, why I encourage people to build shorter, smaller, bite-sized steps in Pathwright that we move through progressively, because it keeps them moving. It gives them a sense of accomplishment. So here we can give our learners this open-ended space to reflect. Then we can give them this discussion thread where they can share an observation with the entire class. By the way, you can turn this on or off depending on what you need. You can turn discussion off for particular cohorts if you need. I like this because it gives my introverted learners a place to reflect, and it gives my extroverted learners a place to talk, and then it encourages them both to kind of break some of their normal habits. This field here would just be viewable to moderators and teachers. Here would just be viewable to anybody in this particular cohort. So anybody who's been invited to, to use the other kind of terms I use, the classroom around that master version of content. Really simple introduction, very easy to snap together. So one of the challenges I wanted to face and kind of encounter whenever I was first using blocks, whenever we introduced it a couple years ago, was how could I use the lowest form of media, the least interesting form of media, text, and still create something that was interesting for my learners. Because a lot of people think that when they get into an online environment, oh, I have to have video, or I have to have animated video. Well, yeah, that can be useful, but it's not necessarily the only thing that you have to do, right? So I got to thinking of, what if I created a course that was called something like The Power of Poetry? And I wanted to prove to somebody that poets used to be rock stars. So I'm going to start my lesson. Imagine this step being at the beginning of a course. I'm going to start my lesson with an introduction to the poetry of Edna St. Vincent Millay. I'm going to drop in a title. I think that this adds a lot of uniformity to a step into a course. So I'm going to start with a title. Let's add in another block. Maybe I'll drop in, I'm going to go to images with text. Let's do an image of Edna St. Vincent Millay. This teases the kind of like show your face thing. It's not exactly what I was talking about, but it'll work. So let's have a short bio of Edna St. Vincent Millay. Pop that in here. And then I'm going to start by asking a question. I want to ask my learners if they think that poets could have been rock stars at one time. We'll add a little formatting there. Let's drop in an assessment. And again, I'm not going to use this as an assessment that I'm going to grade. I can choose whether these are auto-graded or whether I'm going to review assignments after they've been submitted by learners. I just want to use this question to pull learners into this lesson. So I'm going to ask, how much money do you think Edna St. Vincent Millay made in 1935 from poetry? For reference, a U.S. Senator made $8,500 a year. By the way, how much do you all think Edna St. Vincent Millay made from poetry?
That was the middle of the Depression, right, Christian?
Middle of the Great Depression. How much do you think she made from poetry?
$100,000.
Okay.
Woo! 5,000.
Okay.
Nothing.
Next. Nothing. Yeah, that's what poets make now. So now I'm going to use, I want to use this answer explanation, but instead of giving an explanation, I'm going to kind of break the mold a little bit. And I want to use this to actually pull the learner deeper into the steps. So this is going to pop up after they submit their answer. And I'm going to use it to pull them deeper into the step. Finally, we're going to have this flashcard that's going to kind of magically reveal our answer. These flashcards work in a couple different ways. You can throw in images, you can throw in audio files. They end up being great for anytime you're teaching vocabulary or geography or anything like that. I'm going to use this though to just do a simple kind of reveal. Click to reveal Edna's salary. Okay. I'm going to drop in the answer on the other side. And then we have designed a step. So I'm going to publish this. Then real quick, let's experience this like a learner would for the first time. So our learner comes to this step. They read a short bio of Edna. They see her. They say $5,000, submit their answer. Many of us likely wouldn't think of poets as rock stars. Click the flashcard below to see how much she actually made. They click to reveal. Edna made $20,000, over twice as much as what a US senator would have at the height of the Great Depression from poetry, which is insane. Today's equivalent of $300,000. There is no poet alive that makes that much money. Maybe I would end my lesson actually with that fact. I'd say no poet alive has made this much, but what is a poet's cultural relevance today or something like that, right? So without audio, without video, we've created something that's interactive, that has this kind of lean forward style of learning, but that doesn't require a lot from us when it comes to content creation. That's not to say video can't be effective, or even something like an audio file. If we dropped in an audio file here that read out this biography and maybe shared a welcome, so much easier for a person to record than a video, and still has that kind of interactivity. Another thing I do often with another program I run is to do audio guided workbook exercises where you click play on the audio and then you use open-ended assessments to work through as somebody's teaching it. And then of course you can keep things simple. You know, we might start out with a quote or just a simple quiz for review. Anything like that will obviously work with blocks as well. Let's see.
Let's give the team an opportunity to reflect and notice. What did you notice? What did you like? What did you notice?
I love the baked in interactivities. In the past, I've had to dig them up and embed them. So it's nice to, and the idea that they're suggested, that I might not have thought of using them as a flashcard or some other thing. I'd love to explore more of what they look like. And I like the modularity of it.
Thanks, Joyce. Anything else? What are you noticing?
I learned something new about just having someone click is so much better than having them just sit there passive and watch. So I thought that was cool.
Thanks for sharing. Big idea there. Anything else? Okay, let's keep learning.
Nice. Okay, so let's jump into, you'll notice I avoid the typical media like video and audio in some of what I discuss. I'm happy to talk about clever ways to use those. But with these blocks, I think you can do a lot with static content. So if we think about how to kind of teach the big idea or skill, generally in Pathwright, I recommend that each learning session, each of those lesson blocks covers one big idea or skill. That can have multiple threads, of course, but I generally find that that gives the learner the greatest sense of accomplishment after they've gone through that, and gives the teacher the chance to build in the most effective way. One of the things I think about is just how do we tame longer reading? You know, when you come from disciplines like the humanities that I come from, you can't get away from some longer readings. You need longer form pieces in order to show and demonstrate logic. I think that though, at the same time, we can still have interactivity and organization that creates a framework for our learners. One of those is something as simple as just using two-column text. Actually, I've got a little bit of a holdover from yesterday's demonstration here too to show. But just something as simple as using this two-column text block to create a compare and contrast framework for our learners shows them something and gives them something that they just typically wouldn't have. Being able to see things side by side creates so much more of a memory hook for us than just reading things in a list. this is, I think, one of the most underrated blocks. There are more clever ways to do this. For instance, I teach a course on poetry and theology where I introduce at the beginning of this course that we're going to have these two theological kind of conversation partners as we go through, and I introduce them both at the same time. I actually combine this 2-column image block with a 2-column text block to introduce them at the same time. So they look actually like conversation partners. I would just replace these images. By the way, if you click replace image on virtually any image in Pathwright, you get this database of images that you've uploaded so that across courses, you can grab images, search for them. I created a course that relied heavily on the Office, and so there are a lot of Office images there. I created a fake onboarding course. What would it look like to be onboarded to the Office? Or something like using an accordion block to organize big ideas. So this is a company I work with in Greenville. They do psychological coaching for leaders. They have this step on tactics for overcoming anxiety, very short introduction. Then they have these 6 tactics for overcoming anxiety that I can click into and read more. You can imagine, I've done this for Princeton Seminary, for instance, I would take the longer theological essays and at the parts where I could, I would organize them by heading using this accordion block. Or if there were 2 different kind of routes in the essay, I would even use a tab block and have tab 1 and tab 2 that you can switch between so that you can kind of have that compare and contrast and the revelatory component as well. This creates a much easier way for the learner to kind of get in their head, oh yeah, there were six tactics. I could memorize this list really quickly, but then I can come back and review the details if I want, because I don't want to design a path just for initial learning. I also want to design it for review. So when my learner comes back, they can easily select and easily find the information that means the most to them, that the information that they actually need to review, instead of sifting through a lot of content. Just to point out, they've got points attached to this, and they've got a discussion attached to this that kind of makes it more personal, which tactic is helpful there. You can also use, this is one of my favorites, something I didn't show yesterday, Renee, is the image annotation block. So currently I'm working with a former professor of mine. Her specialty are the murals that were created during the Troubles in Ireland. She works very closely with those artists to show the relevance of that artwork. So let's imagine the history of the petrol bomber. That is, the petrol bomber is one of the murals that's shown in Ireland on the face of one of these buildings. Let's say I wanted to create a way for people. Right now, they can't go into museums, they can't go to exhibits. I want to create a way for people to kind of explore this imagery without having to go out, right? So let's pull up an image. We'll grab this image with annotations. I've already uploaded this mural here. And now I'm going to add annotations to this so that my learner can explore. Just to go one step further, I'm also going to drop in an audio file. I know she's got some audio guides to these artworks, so let's imagine I upload that here. And then I'm going to ask at the beginning of this audio file for that learner to explore this image while I talk with them about it. So maybe we drop an annotation on here and we explain, during this time, police, and we explain, right? We say like, during this time, it was common for children to, and we explain part of the cultural context there. Then we have a reflection on top of that, or we have maybe we use a flashcard again and say, what do you think the average age of somebody who died during these troubles would have been? Whatever it is, maybe we have a quote that we attach. This Winston Churchill quote that's just the default quote in Pathwright actually works really well. We shape our buildings thereafter they shape us. Now we've got this, got to publish that content. Now we've got this interactive step with this interactive image that takes us beyond just a static kind of environment. One of my biggest pet peeves, so I studied art at the National Gallery in London. And one of my biggest pet peeves is whenever an artist or a museum curator tries to duplicate their work online, what they do is they just put high-res images online. That's not what a museum is about. We have to break down the components of what a museum is actually about and build it up from the ground up. A museum is about the conversation that you have around the piece as much as about the piece itself, right? So now we've got this conversation around the piece. We've given our learner a way to explore the details in this images so that it actually becomes something that they can interact with. It lives a little bit louder in their lives. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause there again. What questions or ideas do you have about seeing some more about teaching the big idea or skill before we talk about project assessments? Okay, we'll go ahead and blaze forward.
I just want, I've been, my video and audio have been coming back and forth with this network thing. I just want, so you can annotate images with audio and video as well as text?
Okay, yeah, so you can annotate them with text. You can't annotate them with audio yet, but I really like that idea.
Can you annotate video?
You can't annotate video, but you can have it alongside of other media types.
Okay.
But I'd love to hear more about that use case. So
yeah, ThingLink is a great tool for doing that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's another kind of, well, one of the things that we try to do at Pathwright is if we can't do something, we try to still make it easy to be done in Pathwright. Virtually anything that has an embed link can work in Pathwright. So all of those other tools that you love can still work in this environment. Pathwright can kind of act as the place around those. The other thing is that we love hearing about those ideas. There are a lot of things that we just haven't thought of yet. So feel free to share those with us and we can pass them along to the dev team. We keep a record of ways to improve blocks. For instance, the flashcard block didn't start out with being able to attach an audio file. I worked with somebody who was designing a language course and went to our dev team and just said, hey, we need this. Like, we need a pronunciation guide along with these flashcards. This makes the tool that much better. And kind of advocated for that on behalf of the educators. And we added it in.
So can I just ask, it sounds like there is, I just want to make sure. So for some of our participants who may not, who when they go back in the fall may not have access to this interface, let's just use that ThingLink example, for example. Could we design a little activity and then embed a link to ThingLink? And so they know, okay, I don't have this LMS, I have another LMS, but I still know how to use ThingLink. And so, or whatever. So we can still do that. And that way they can,
embeddable. Absolutely.
They can have access to the tools that they need, even though it's in this interface, if for some people that's a limit.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I kind of recommend, like, there are ways to attach all kind of resources to steps as well. You can, upload any kind of link or upload any kind of file for download. So there are all kinds of ways to kind of send them away with a kit of, hey, here's how to reuse this idea.
Hey, Christian, I have a crazy idea since we only have 15 minutes and I want to make sure everybody feels really comfortable using the Media Education Lab website. And I want to talk about something that Julie and I talked about an hour ago that I think could be a really cool thing. So can I share my screen?
Please do, yeah.
Okay, so when you guys go to the link that, if you haven't yet done that, if you go to Pathwright with the link that I sent you, you're going to see that you have been granted the privilege to be a library editor at the Media Education Lab path, right? And so just like what Christian said, when you enter at this 10,000 feet level, right? And you are fully empowered to make as many paths as you want. And when you go over here to the menu to explore the library, you'll see that we've organized the library with an agenda that has essentially what the learners will experience in the path, what they'll do before they arrive, what they'll do on Sunday, right? What they'll do on Monday, and so forth. So basically the outline for the whole week is here. So did you notice, you guys, how Christian used Pathwright as a presentation tool at the beginning when he was teaching us about the Legos? He embedded a presentation into a path, which is amazing, Christian, and I didn't even think about how you could do that. But when you go to the library, you can explore the workshop example that I shared with you, or the conversation example, and start to create your own. But today, Julie and Kara and I were having a conversation because we were looking at all of the workshop proposal ideas that you guys came up with. And we sort of realized that we really have to underline that we're never going to say the word asynchronous and synchronous ever again, right? Pinky swear, right? We're never going to say those words ever again because the world does not understand them. Teachers do not understand those words. We're going to say anytime and real time. But today, when we were thinking about how to synthesize workshops, we wondered, and this might be a crazy idea, so I could be wrong. Given that our learners are so diverse, what if we have a topic on a big idea and there's an anytime workshop that's targeted for K-6 teachers? There's an anytime workshop that's targeted, oh, I could duplicate that, watch, copy and paste. There's an anytime workshop for high school teachers. There's an anytime copy and paste. There's an anytime workshop for college faculty, so that when people, and remember, these are small learning experiences. They're only meant to take about 30 minutes, right? That's the idea. We're planning about a 30-minute opportunity. What if people had all of those options before they came to the real-time workshop in the synchronous space where we're having a Zoom conversation? That would be so cool, because then basically we can tap into the expertise of the people in the room, that this one topic, there is a K-6 orientation, that it introduces those ideas for the K-6 a teacher. There is a way to focus multiple paths asynchronously that would tap into our different expertise, and it also might encourage us to collaborate in a deep way in the asynchronous, in the anytime portion. And also giving users choice, so that, for instance, a librarian or someone else, they might want to look at the elementary one and they might want to look at the high school one too, right? And start to see, like, what does this look like across the K-12 scope and sequence? So does that seem crazy, or what do you think about that? Why did we think that was a good idea, Julie?
So I just wanted to clarify, as you were talking, and I'm looking at people's faces, and maybe it's confusing and maybe it's not, because at the end, the point would be the little on their own kinds of things they're doing in their own little space, but then they come to the common real-time space and they share. Ryan is the second grade teacher. Well, here's what, I don't know, propaganda, whatever it looks like in second grade, and some of these are the issues. And so then we may even, because we've talked about in our workshops, we may have to condense and synthesize and maybe be partners. I'll just make this up. So let's say Terry Deeney and I, we have our own way. Terry, I don't know, let's say we're talking about Zoomifying instruction or whatever. And so Terry has a couple of ideas for the K-6 reading people. I have a couple of ideas for the higher ed people. And so you come into the space about Zoomifying and you do your little anytime, and then Terry and I actually join the same real-time space. And Terry says, so what are the elementary people? And then the higher ed people are listening. And so we break off, maybe we said, maybe of the hour real time, the first 15 minutes is, just kind of synthesizing, facilitating. The second 15 minutes is go to your common group. The third 15 minutes is mix people up. So you get the little elementary with the higher ed, and then and the bonus is, if you have two faculty members, we can kind of play in the different spaces and kind of navigate things. And then in the last 15 minutes, we come back and we kind of pull it together and we say, gee, so let's talk about, well, this is a great thing at elementary school, and in higher ed, that would never work, but here's a different twist. So what do people think of that idea as we're trying to condense and consolidate, but also send the message of this, you know, everyone learns from everyone and the partnership of faculty?
The power of two. So I think given we have a little bit of time, we're just going to let you think about that idea. We're going to try to put something together for you to read over the weekend. But I think what's interesting is we are thinking about Pathwright in relationship to Zoom, anytime learning in relation to real-time learning. And we want to think about that in a really, we don't want these to be two separate things. We want to think about these as really naturally building on each other, because from a design point of view, that's what's going to make the meaningful learning, right? There's the anytime piece and then there's the real-time piece, but they're really designed together. And Christian, you've thought a lot about the relationship between Pathwright and Zoom yourself, haven't you?
Yes. So one thing to note is that we actually use Pathwright to have everybody sign up for live events or live demos that we host. And again, we use it as the place that they arrive at and come back to. It might not be the place that they actually meet within. The place that they meet within is the Zoom call, but we use it as a way to prepare them. So a lot of times I'll ask questions beforehand. What are you hoping to learn from this? What, you know, particular questions do you have? It informs me as the facilitator of the event. Then the next step in the path I'll have is, here are the Zoom details. I'll set that up with a due date so that it will remind people. By the way, in part for your conference, we're actually changing some of the ways that messaging and due dates work in Pathwright, so there'll be even cooler things to do for you. And then I'll have a follow-up step that'll have a recording of that Zoom session and a place to discuss or reflect or to gather the resources that we talked about in that live session. So then it all kind of works together as, again, as the place that they arrive at and come back to, and then it facilitates them to, it kind of acts as a hallway towards the Zoom call.
I'm getting a couple of private questions, and I wanted to, because we have the whole group here. So we do have a quote template in a Google Doc version. For those of you who are a little more comfortable, let's just say watch, do, discuss. You're not ready to think about the really intentional use of tools. You just first want to get through, okay, what do I want them to do? Watch, do, and discuss. We do have a template for that. And then Renee also has the parallel, if you will, template and Pathwright. So you have, I guess, three options. You could either start in Google Docs and then ask for help in moving it over to Pathwright. You could start in Pathwright and play around with the tools and leave it in Pathwright, or you could make some combination. We don't want to, it would be great if ultimately everybody gets something into Pathwright, but especially in the beginning, one of the comments I put in the chat is it's both interesting and I think a little overwhelming because these tools are so intentionally driven. You actually have to sit back and think about your intent. And so if for some of you, if Google Doc is easier to think about the intent, then I just wanted to communicate that to everybody. So as we send out whatever we're going to send out with the workshops, you understand you have flexibility.
Julie, I think that's a really good point. And even to that, I think you asked something about like principles or kind of basics around that. These are kind of the 6 things that I go back to. They're kind of 6 filters for thinking about how am I designing this path. The one that you were just talking about, Julie, I think is this idea of iteration. We're working with pixels on a screen, which means that we can make an MVP. We can make a minimum viable product and come back and iterate. We can come back and make it great. So test and refine progressively as you want. Use multiple tools for that testing and refinement. Another one, even just to show how innate a lot of these are to education, Renee, you were talking about this just-in-time principle. We deliver guidance and resources when learners need to focus on it, right? Not whenever they don't and then have them. That's the difference between, I think, an effective learning management system or an effective learning experience and just a resource manager. Again, with even kind of using Pathwright to facilitate these in-person events, we want everything all in one place. So instead of sending everybody to the, far reaches of the internet, we want to, as much as possible, collect and filter their experience. So even if we send them out, there's always a place to come back to. Yeah, we can go over those other three, but those three are just something that I've heard kind of in the conversation recently.
Nice. Wow, I love that beautiful way that you modeled that synthesis too. Isn't that cool? It's a visual modeling of synthesis. Damn, that was nice. Joyce asked a really good question, which is, what happens to this after CITL is over? And the answer is, this will always be here and it'll always be open. Once you're so when people get their sign-in link, they join the Media Education Lab. I guess we're called a school, right? Right, Christian? It's a school.
Pathwright account or Pathwright school.
It's our account. It's the Media Education Lab school, and so they'll always be able to access the content. It'll always be there. And this may get us thinking about, well, what might we want to offer during the year, right? How might we want to use what we built iteratively in other contexts for other kinds of learning experiences? Maybe we do a one-day retreat. Maybe we do there's other ways that the stuff that we create could be repurposed and reused as we iterate and figure it out. But yes, it'll be, whatever we create this year will be here forever for people to go back into and use forever. It'll always be open to them.
As far as a database of examples to explore, we do have several help articles, and then on Pathwright, we actually have an example section where we talk about here are really well-designed libraries, here are really well-designed courses, things like that. The other thing, I don't want to brag on Pathwright too much, but the other thing that we do that a lot of other LMSs don't do is to have someone like me. Like my entire job is just to meet with people one-on-one like this, and not to sell anything, but just to talk to you about whatever ideas that you have. I have told my bosses, I never want to talk about money and I never want to sell Pathwright. I just want to work with educators on education. So anytime you want to schedule a one-on-one chat with me to talk about the best examples or to talk about the specificity of whatever you're designing, you can schedule an education lab session with me to do that. Beautiful.
Charlie.
Hi, I had a question. This has been fascinating, Christian. I appreciate your time. So I think the anytime feature is really going to be awesome. And I think everyone's dealing with overload in this time and with technology. So a searchable function where, 2 months after the Institute, people can go back and type in a keyword and say, curation ideas for librarians or something where they can just get to the right paths to do the anytime stuff. Because I imagine this thing's going to get overloaded if we do it right. And then being able to find stuff when you need it is important.
That's a great point, Charlie. So that already works at the library level. And then one of the things that we're adding pretty soon, hopefully before your conference, is the idea of a path index. And that's going to work at multiple levels. But essentially, there's going to be a search function at the path level where you can type in a word and it takes you to even a particular step that references that idea.
Wow, cool. Okay, so you guys have spent an hour learning Pathwright. Let's give Christian a round of applause. Thank you, Christian, you are now de facto part of the Media Education Lab.
Oh, wonderful. It's a good group to be a part of.
Yeah, we really enjoyed it, you guys. He will be here tomorrow at 1 o'clock if you want to learn more. But otherwise, I think Julie and I both think that you should just take some time to play and explore and learn. I think the Pathwright Grow modules are amazing, and I've learned a lot by taking those. So they're really easy. They're fun. They're very snackable. You can
Renee,
do 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there.
Can I just ask a quick question? Back at the Media Lab page, when you made the work example and conversation example, if somebody wanted to play, could they just make a copy of that and then just call it their own play thing? Okay.
And I'll share my Calendly link with Renee. So if you wanted to schedule a one-on-one with me, you could do that as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
And we'll be in touch, faculty, about workshop stuff in a day or two.
Christian, do you by chance have time to stay on or no?
Yeah, I do.
Renee, I don't know who's recording, but maybe we don't need to record this part.